Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Happy Hour Live webcast from WhiskyCast.com. It's Friday, February 25th. I'm Mark Gillespie in the studio. Welcome and hope you're having a good week. It has been an interesting week, to say the least. We have had a little bit of everything happening this week. We can't help but pay attention to what's happening in Ukraine right now. Our thoughts are clearly with the Ukrainian people. It's just an unfortunate situation all around. I'll be joined in just a couple of minutes here by Dr. Don Livermore, the master blender from the Hiram Walker Distillery in Windsor, Ontario. Matter of fact, there's Don right now. Hi, Don.
Hello. Hi, Mark.
I think we had a slight snafu on the link there, and that's my fault. Apologies for that.
I was in the last time we spoke, and I was seeing all the private comments that people were making. So yeah.
So, how are you doing right now?
Good. Yeah, I'm at work. I've been at work for all this time, so things are going well. Very, very busy.
Let's bring in some of the comments as folks like Dave Q. And look at that, just another Friday afternoon. Our pal Greg Serafian. Hi, Mark, Don, and everyone from a cold Paris. We will keep thinking about the people of Ukraine, as Dave Kuhn points out. Ajay, good afternoon, Mark and Don. So what are you working on these days? It seems like it's about time to unveil another edition in the NHL Alumni Series, huh?
We haven't got anything coming out in the next little while, but I think we got one of the most exciting things in the Hiram Walker history we're working on these days, Mark.
Can you tell us about it at all, or is this one of those?
No.
You got to wait and see.
It's in behind me here. I actually poured myself a dram of it, but it is the first time we have released a cask-strength whiskey, a single barrel, probably since the inception of probably the aging law in 1890. Because up to that point, they probably would have sold whiskey by the barrel, but we've never released one single barrel, and it's a lot 40 18-year cask-strength, aged in seasoned oak casks, and we have put it on what they called is the dropcollective.ca. It's open until February 28th, and those who sign up will get the opportunity to go in for a draw for the right to purchase 99 bottles of it. and you have to have it sent to an Ontario address. Unfortunately, that's one of those regulatory rules inside of Canada. So if anybody who has that, when they sign up, it needs to be those who with an Ontario address.
So we can send them to you at the Hiram Walker Distillery, and then you can forward them on to us, right?
You want to? I don't do anything outside of shipping. I just make whiskey, Mark. So if you're coming into Ontario and you have a friend, and you certainly probably can transport across borders if you're coming to visit somebody here. So yeah, it's really exciting. We released 18 bottles of it just prior to Christmas, and in the traffic jam on the dropcollective.ca was just incredible. We weren't people's best of friends that day, but when everybody's kind of clamoring to go onto the website, obviously it's like 1,000 people going through a doorway at once. So, but those 18 lucky individuals who got a bottle already, the reviews have been very, very good. So I'm quite excited about it, as you can tell.
I'm jealous because I want to try this. As soon as I heard you were doing an 18-year-old, I'm going, wait a second, because I've got the regular Lot 40 in my glass right now. And it's always been one of my favorite Canadian ryes. And I'm just going, I got to try an 18-year-old.
Yeah, it's one thing that and cheers to that, by the way. It's one of those things I've been continually being asked at whiskey festivals, Mark, and when I do whiskey tastings, when are you going to do a single cask release? And I kind of always hesitate because, as you know, Canadian whiskey is more around blending and that sort of thing. But as you know, our brand with Lot 40 is 100% rye, pot distilled and aged in new wood. So that is certainly the brand that you would do a single cask release on it, and I'm quite excited about what we'll see come. We're going to do the draw March 4th. So those who are listening here, you'll get an email come March 4th as to if you're a lucky person to be able, and you have 7 days to reach out to us to buy it, and it's sold at $250 a bottle is what we're asking price for it.
250 Canadian.
Yes. So what is that, about $40 US?
You said that, I didn't. I was going to say about 200 American, but
I don't know what the conversion rate.
Greg in Paris is going, we want this, Don, in all caps. Do you have more of it available if you want to do second cask?
Not of this particular cask. So this cask was a one that was sitting around in what we call as a seasoned oak cask. So the staves themselves were aged out in the drying yard for 4 years, and this is the type of barrel we put in. So it's one of those things I was playing around with that we really didn't have a home, certainly not a large enough quantity to have a full out release. And it's one of those things that, hey, why don't we just launch a single cask? People want it. And so we listened, and this is our opportunity to do it. And we're trying to do it as fairly as possible. And it's one of those things, it's our first experience of doing a single cask that many, many people want. So doing a draw is the best way we could come up with, and hopefully it's fair to everybody.
And how many casks, Dave Kuhn wants to know, how many casks were you considering for this one? Or was it just this one?
That was the only cask we had on it, quite honestly. It's very unique. You'll never see it again. I know, teasing to people, but definitely one we're very quite excited about. And I think from all we could tell, and the amount of people looking at it, I don't think it'll be our last single cask release. So I don't know what the next one will be, but I certainly, as anybody knows me quite well, I'm always playing around with something.
Yeah, we know you've always got a bunch of experiments, and I'm even more disappointed that we couldn't be together in Victoria this year, because I'm sure you would have brought some of that with you, right?
Yes,
you would have, right?
Yes, we would have had bottles. Yes, we would have had bottles there. It was a couple of months ago now, but yes, it would have had some bottles. And I was actually teasing out some Lot 40 that have been aging in some port casks as well. That was one of my intentions. That's at a Cask-Strength. That's one of the ones I'm kind of thinking at the moment. Is it ready to be released? And I was looking for people's opinions, because I usually run a masterclass at Victoria every year as Dr. Don's Experiments is kind of what it's called. So that was one of the ones that we're kind of considering at the moment, is to do a port cask version of Lot 40.
What else are you working on outside of Lot 40 these days? Because you've got the whole range of J.P. Wiser's, the Goodrum and Wirtz, and the Pike Creek labels. And we didn't really get to see much in the way of the special releases this year because of the pandemic this last fall.
Yeah, I'm always tinkering with Pike Creek and Gooderham. I really don't have anything at the moment that I can tip my hand on. The JP Wisers has some exciting things that are certainly going to be coming out. One of the ones that we've looked at this year was a JP Wisers 23 year. I actually we've released this brand once prior, a number of years ago. And as you know, I tease it out at whiskey tastings, and I happened to do a whiskey tasting with a group out of Sweden with Whiskey Snack is the group there, and we're just nicely introducing a Wiser's 10-year-old into that market that's doing very, very well, and we have great aspirations for a Wiser's 10-year at some point in coming into the North American market. So stay tuned on that. I don't have any more information in terms of timing on something like that, but they had asked me, can you do some? We don't know much about Canadian whiskey. Can you throw anything into this tasting that is special in Canada? And that year happened to be the 23 year, and I sent a sample over to them, and they were just amazed. So if for the audience here, the 23 year was a Cask-Strength blend, we called it. So it had a blend of base whiskey and pot distilled rye whiskey in it. Sits at 59.9% ABV. Sent a sample over to them. The entire club just adored this thing, Mark.
I think I still have a bottle of the original Wiser's 23 on my shelf, about 6-7 feet away and just out of reach, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's what we sent over, and they said, is there any way we can get this into the market? So it took about a year and a bit, and working through the COVID, and we just nicely released it this last couple of weeks into the Swedish market. And I know they had their first initial online sales of the 23, and it sold out within under an hour. Which is extraordinary, for a Canadian whiskey. And it'll be sold in their stores in the next number of weeks. And but it's the first time a rare released Canadian whiskey has gone into the Swedish market. So it was quite the project, and it all just stemmed for an innocent whiskey tasting with a group out of Sweden.
Now, Tyrone Cote lives in Nova Scotia, but I know he has friends in Ontario. Where do you put your name in for the draw for that Lot 40 18-year-old?
So you can go to thedropcollective.ca, sign up and become a member of it, and they will send out an email to you to make sure that you are involved. And as long as there's an Ontario address, you're signed in for the draw. So just make sure those emails might come into your junk box or your folder. Just have a look out. So whatever email you end up giving in, that's the way to do it.
And Alex Briere is in Ontario and loves the Lot 40 Cask-Strength peated.
Yes.
Tell us about that one, because that's another one, because of pandemic restrictions, I have not had the chance to try yet.
Yeah, there it is here. So this is what they're adopting, the rye exploration series, and this is the version 1 of it, and it is Cask-Strength. So this was released last fall into the LCBO and into the BCLS market. Those are the 2 liquor boards that were willing to take it on. It is a Cask-Strength Lot 40 that has been aged in once used bourbon barrels, and then I moved it over to peated quarter casks for about 11-12 months was the length of time in a peated quarter cask. We get our peated quarter casks through a third-party broker out of Europe. So it could be a mixed match of peated quarter casks. They won't tell me which company it comes from, so that's a little bit of the challenge to the people that try it. Oh, it's this peated cask, or I recognize this peat. It's done nicely in Ontario and BC, and I think it's pretty much sold through now, from what I can tell. And I just think it's just the beautiful combination of rye and peat that come together on that one. So you got that spicy and then plus that smoky note. It's certainly one of a kind. I haven't seen any style of Canadian whiskeys that are aged in peated quarter cask. If they are, they're not very large, and it's just one of my favorites. Absolutely, I just love the combination of the 2 that come together.
Of course, they're not large; they're quarter casks.
Yes, they are. They're not very big.
Sorry. Sorry, you sort of set that one up for me. But
Yeah.
Dave Kuhn wants to know, being a part of the Corby world, do you get access to things like Havana Club casks for finishing?
Um, no, but we do have our regular brand Pike Creek that I do have other Caribbean casks that's aged in that. The Havana Club, no. However, I'm very familiar with Havana Club. We do see it that comes through here and through Canada, and we're part of their quality team as they enter into Canada. So, haven't had an opportunity yet. I like where you're going with it. I think rum has some extraordinary notes that you can certainly bring into whiskey. And something I look at from time to time for sure. Great question, Dave.
What spirits don't work well as finishing casks with whiskey, in your opinion?
Um, I find things work on solo a little bit. So if I did a sherry or if I did a cognac or things on their own, it's fine. But if I did a combination of going into maybe a cognac barrel and then into a sherry barrel, I find it clashes a little bit. So that's where I find that you got to have certain watch outs in terms of what is the ratio, and that's where blending is beautiful. If you're going to start to play around with those things, that's just my personal opinion. Honestly, somebody might tell me otherwise, but I find cognac and wines sometimes don't go together. I'm trying to think of other combinations as well. There's certain things along the way that it's not right. It's not right. My advice to people, though, if you want to look at without taking the risk, Mark, without taking the risk of buying a cask and trying to finish it, my trick here's my advice. It's about 1%. So if I want to age in a particular type of wine cask, let's say, I know we did some Cabernet Sauvignon casks with Pike Creek a number of years ago. I take 1% of that Cabernet Sauvignon, 99% of that whiskey I want to age. That can give me a little bit of a gauge on how it's going to turn out. Right?
Interesting barometer, and then that would work for pretty much any spirit, right?
Pretty much. I'm not going to guarantee you that 1% is. It's about what I find is the sweet spot. At some point, you're only going to get so much of whatever was in that cask out into it. And it does come out rather quickly. It's kind of what I did my PhD on as well. It's about 200 days for the full product to diffuse into the liquid. It will concentrate over a longer period of time just because of evaporation. Right. So if you had a Oloroso sherry cask, all the Oloroso will come into the whiskey in about 200 days. After that, it's just a natural concentration up with evaporative losses after that. So so it depends how long you keep it in those casks too, is the other caveat to that.
Boy, Greg in Paris is just having a field day tonight. He wants to try a Wiser's Deluxe with a Sauterne finish.
Yes, me too. I've been looking at some of those barrels. Just real recently, I haven't had a chance to pull out an inventory of that. Wiser's Deluxe is actually doing well here in Canada after the last year. We're keeping ahead of pace of what Canadian whiskey growth is, which is fantastic. So a large brand like Deluxe as our flagship brand is keeping pace here in Canada, and we're actually seeing nice growth with it in the U.S. at the moment too. So, which are good signs, and I think we're seeing a turn and some interest in Canadian whiskey. The other one we're seeing that has been an interesting innovation for us as well is we've done the Wiser's Old Fashioned. It's probably been one of the best innovations in terms of case volumes for Wiser's in a number of years, and I think there's a natural cocktail culture that's happening in Canada as well. And we continue to produce that and look at line extensions of that, and also introduce that one into the U.S. as well. So it's a nice little benchmark for the Wiser's Deluxe and the Wiser's franchises, some of those mainstream brands.
These premixed cocktails seem to be becoming a thing now. I just got some from a U.S. distillery in the New England area that's doing a bunch of these things now, and it seems like this is where a lot of people are focusing their attention.
Yeah, there's a market for it. I can't ignore it, Mark. And I think an old fashioned is a nice way to look at certainly whiskey and Canadian whiskey as well. I know we've got a Manhattan. It doesn't do as well as the old fashioned, but certainly it has interest as well. But it's almost at the pace of what consumers drink. I think the old fashions are a little more popular than Manhattans, and I think JP Wiser's is leading the way in those pre-mixed cocktails. There's certainly a market for it.
And Tyrone wants to know about Wiser's with an ice wine finish. Have you tried anything with ice wine?
I have not, and I'd love to find somebody who has ice wine barrels. I'm not even sure how many ice wine brands are even in barrels, and I think the people that do those probably keep them to themselves, or they're highly spoken for, I would think. But I agree with you. That seems like a natural thing to do with Canadian whiskey. The other one I'll get, and I played. It was a failure. I'll have to admit to that on it, is I've tried to age Wiser's into a maple syrup barrel as well. Yeah, it leaked everywhere, to be honest with you, Mark.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
Yeah, by the time we got the barrel back, it was just completely dried out, and we tried to put some whiskey in it, and it just went all over our operating floor. But something I like to do that too is maybe play with that. It seems like a natural connection for Canadian whiskey.
Kevin DeVries in Ontario has a bottle of the Wiser small batch in hiding. Any plans to release a similar product or an updated version of Wiser's small batch?
The closest brand, Kevin, I would say to Wiser's small batch would be the Wiser's 15-year currently that's in market. I did mention the Wiser's 10-year that is in the European market at the moment. So stay tuned on that. That one will be could be a nice affordable option as well. So if today I'd look to the 15, usually steer them towards a 15-year for the Wiser small batch. Yeah. Pete,
I want you.
There we go. Yes.
I want to go back. Yeah, that is an interesting combination.
Yeah. Can't say I've done that. I like it though. I like where you're going.
We got a bunch of creative listeners here, viewers that just come up with all sorts of great ideas. I want you to explain more about your PhD work, because it really was sort of groundbreaking work into the impacts of wood on whiskey back in the day, right?
Yeah. So it's one of the things actually this week or this last couple of weeks that Corby has taken a course in Canadian whiskey production. It's called the A, B, and C's of whiskey. Our brand ambassadors, Gina Fawcett and Dave Mitten, are sending out an offering to the bartenders at the moment of running this course. So it's a 4-week course, and you get accreditation of how Canadian whiskey is made. I lectured this week on aging Canadian whiskey, which is what my PhD was on. One of the issues we face with Canadian whiskey producers is we do buy used barrels from a number of bourbon producers, just like many other whiskey categories around the world. And one of the things I struggle with, Mark, is the quality of those barrels that come in. Today, the best test, it really is the sniff test. You put your nose in the barrel. Does it have any off odors? And what is it the risk to the brand? So what I was trying to do with my PhD was take infrared sensors, measure the inside of the barrel, and in about 30 seconds, I would be able to quantify the amount of wood that would come into whiskey over the life of the aging period. So in other words, when we buy barrels from bourbon producers, I don't know if they're 4-year-old or 20 years old, right? How much wood is there left to give? And that was the thought and the thesis to my PhD. Unfortunately, that's kind of where I left it at. Theoretically, you could do it in 30 seconds. I could tell you the quality of a barrel. The difficult part, I guess that's what PhDs are about, is the theoretical side of things. But I would need to work with a fiber optics company to be able to get probes inside here's a bung here, here's the size of a bung hole, and be able to touch the surface of inside the barrel. So that's kind of where I left it at. It is doable to be able to measure the quality of a barrel, and that was the sense of my PhD. So the studies of that, I know the types of wood molecular compounds that could come into your whiskey, how quickly, which ones are more important than others, and then I think that then leads into the JP Wiser's dissertation, which we released. The small batch was part of us playing around with new virgin oak for the first time. Wiser's Legacy, the Red Letter, all those brands were pretty much the very beginning of all the PhD work that I was working on. And today, now we're talking about Peter Quarter cask and things like that. So it's just kind of momentum has built from that about And actually, Mark, 10 years ago this week was was when I defended my PhD. It's actually 10 years ago this week.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah. Don't want to do that again, defend a PhD, but yeah, it's been 10 years since I've completed it.
Does it matter where on the inside of the barrel the probe touches? Or could you use it, say, put the fiber optics onto a longer probe and touch the bottom of the barrel through the other side of the barrel through the bung?
You got to get under the char surface because the way the
Okay.
light would reflect off the black char, you got to get underneath the surface where the interaction will occur with your whiskey. So that was another takeaway in the learning, which is the challenge is how could you get a fiber optic probe into a barrel and then get it so it's now touching all the different surfaces of the barrel. But I see where you're going with it because you're thinking is a used barrel because of the evaporation.
No.
Oh, I thought that's where you're going to ask me next.
No, I'm thinking the heads,
sections?
the inside of the heads, because the heads are only toasted.
Some are charred. Depends who you're buying them from. But yeah,
but most of the time they're just toasted.
Yeah, yeah. I got one here behind. I can pick it up in front of my camera if you want. We have some that are charred as well through the years, but,
yeah. But not every cooperage chars the heads, but that might be a way to do it.
Yeah. I was a little concerned when I was doing a PhD. It depends if you have the way the barrels sit, right? As it ages over time, is there some staves and some sections that are going to give you a higher concentration of wood, more so than others? That was where I was thinking you're going to ask the question, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's lots of research that could be done with barrels. I mean, what is the sweet spot for burning it in terms of temperature to get vanilla or more smoky or spicy notes? And I think that's the fun part about whiskey, Mark. I mean, there's so many things that you can do around barrels and how you burn it and temperature profiles and toasting and that sort of thing. Keeps me up at night, Mark.
Yeah, but how do you get to work with the cooperages if you're buying mostly used barrels to actually experiment with some of this stuff?
We do work with coopers. We have some in Kentucky. We got a couple that in Kentucky we work with, and then there's one in Europe that we work with as well. That we're working for certain specifications and certain quality types for the barrels. So they'll sell us new barrels just like they would a bourbon producer. I think that's the wonderful thing about Canadian whiskey. We're just not held to putting it into a new barrel. I mean, we can put it into different types of bourbon barrels, wheated bourbon barrels, like I mentioned, sherry and cognacs and sauternes barrels earlier. I mean, that's the beautiful thing, and I'll keep coming back. Is blending is beautiful. I mean, you can bring a lot of characters into your whiskey, and it's fun. You can tell I have fun with it.
Yeah. Now, the question I have is, if you take that same whiskey and put it into a ex-wheated bourbon barrel compared to an ex-rye forward bourbon barrel, will there be a difference in the end in the taste?
Yeah, absolutely. You'll see the difference. You'll see the components that will certainly distinctive of wheat, and you'll get that certainly that bready is usually the descriptor I'll use around the wheated bourbon barrels, and then the rye bourbon barrels, you'll get that spice. You get the spice. Now, for me, I probably wouldn't look for a rye bourbon barrel because we make rye anyway, a lot of it. So I can blend rye in it naturally. If you follow my line of thought. Yeah. So it's a rye.
But since most bourbons use rye as the flavoring grain, so that's why.
Right. Yeah. And since we do 100% rye fermentations, it's not a big deal. Now, wheated bourbon barrels, we don't do a lot of wheat, and it does give an interesting flavor when I put it into our base whiskey. So again, the options are wonderful when you can buy those casks, or they're only like 6 hours from us, a lot of the bourbon producers.
Ooh, this is a good question from Whiskey Canuck. Is there a difference between the possible fuels used to create the flame that you char with? Is it limited to the temperature they burn at, or could there be chemical interactions too? We don't see a lot of people using wood fires anymore to char barrels, but usually it's just natural gas or propane, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I can speculate if you want, because I've never really tried that. I do believe at certain temperatures the breakdown of wood will differ. We know that for sure. There is a sweet spot that we know lignin will burn at. There is a sweet spot where we know cellulose and hemicellulose will burn at. So yes, temperature is very important, and I think that toasting you talked about, and I believe if you probably hold it at a temperature for a longer period of time, I think that will also help too. So I think these are the experiments that wood producers are working with all the time. Is what are the different ways they can break apart cellulose and lignin to help bring those characters out. Now, I'll also say too, breaking down a barrel with a flame is one way to break down a barrel, but you got to remember this too, Mark, is alcohol is a good solvent. It's called ethanol lysis. Alcohol will chip away at the large molecules of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. And I believe those are larger molecular compounds that we can't even measure that gives a certain texture to your whiskey. And that's where I think, rapid aging and stuff like that, you'll get a certain flavor profile. But I also think there's a natural degradation to a longer aged whiskey to give it different texture or different percentages of different things added too. So there is the burning barrel part of it. But then on the other side, you got to remember that alcohol will chip away at a barrel and create larger molecules. So I didn't realize I'd get into this kind of depth, Mark, but sorry.
Oh, we always do every time we start talking with you. We go. I mean, this is geek paradise for whiskey lovers. I mean, we're just having fun with this one.
Yeah.
And Ajay wants to take that course with Gina and Dave. How can he get hooked up for it?
I would just keep in touch with Ajay, with Gina and Dave. They have been getting inundated. They didn't realize the demand. They first wanted to offer it to our key customers and the bartender community, but the casual whiskey fan is also have been inundating them with them. And I've been after them. I said, we got to do a next course, and open it up to it. And they have aspiration to do that, Ajay. But I can't give dates or anything at this point. They want to pause and reel it. The last course date is next week, where I'm going to talk about the history of blending, why Canadian whiskey is blended, what are the watch-outs on chill filtration and color addition, and things of that nature too. So they really dig deep in this course that they're offering. So stay tuned is my short answer on that one.
But as for courses, you still teach your blending course, right, at the distillery?
It's been paused since COVID. Ontario is actually changing on March 1st, so it's going to start to open up a little bit more. Ontario's been behind, I think, the rest of North America. But once things start opening up, my intention is still continuing to do that once a quarter. I'm debating about bringing it to Europe at some point. I don't know how yet, but I've been asked to how can we bring a blending 101 to Europe, and the challenge will be is where and how to get products over there. But it seems to have some popularity as well.
I think you could probably find a market for it down here in the States as well.
Yes, I've been asked on that too. It's as of the moment I say, come and visit me is my best option, but you never know where it'll evolve. And I think at this point, Mark, I really want to get it up and running again, and then see how we can take it on the road is thought. I'm not quite sure how I may do that, but I know the demand is there.
Let's see. We have a comment from Greg. Another topic, but the French whiskey scene is exploding at the moment, like the Irish one. 82 companies producing whiskeys in France now. How much experience have you had with them? I know you've been over for some of the events over there occasionally, or a little bit of travel, right?
Yeah, a little. I haven't traveled in 2 years. Last one was last
you
time
and me both,
was Boston. Yeah. Hopefully we'll open up here. I'm thinking again in our next fiscal year in June. I haven't had much opportunity, Greg, to try French whiskey. I'd love to try it. I'm all for it, and certainly the Irish whiskey as well. Unfortunately, in Canada, we don't get a lot of opportunities to get inside of it, but I can't wait to come over and visit you guys again and get involved and see what flavors they can bring to the profile. And who knows, maybe there's an opportunity for some collaboration and changing of whiskey barrels. I'd love to see how a Canadian whiskey might age out in a French whiskey cask or an Irish cask as well. I'm open to the idea.
Well, you have a natural partnership with some folks in Ireland that make whiskey. It seems like you ought to be able to get your hands on some Irish whiskey casks.
And Chivas as well. I've done some aging in some of their barrels. I thought I saw Sandy on here earlier, and I've had an opportunity to age some in some of his Speyside malt casks. So it turns out quite well, and we've successfully launched some brands that way. And I know when I do my blending 101, that's one that a lot of people will gravitate to, is the single malt casks that we age our products in.
One of those, if I remember right, was a Pike Creek, right?
Yeah, it's been one of my favorite. It just brings a whole new dynamic to our whiskey, just a whole new complexity. It's soft, delicious, and it brings in those notes that's certainly distinctive to the single malts that Chivas makes.
Now, this may sound a bit like preaching to the choir here because we've got a bunch of Canadian whiskey lovers, but I know there are some folks watching that don't really understand just why Canadian whiskey is special. Give me the elevator pitch for why people should be drinking Canadian whiskey.
Okay. Yeah. So what I say with Canadian whiskey, it's the most innovative, creative, and adaptable style of whiskey there is. And what I mean by that is all we have to do is be made of grain, fermented, aged, and distilled in Canada, aged in a wooden barrel of less than 700 liters for a minimum of 3 years, and a minimum of 40% alcohol. And that's pretty much it. So we're not restricted by measuring for a mash bill. We're not restricted on what percent alcohol we distill to. We can use pot stills, column stills, and that really makes Canadian whiskey diverse. I mean, they don't tell us the types of barrels, as long as it's wood of less than 700 liters. I mean, it just opens up what I sometimes call as the painter's palette to whiskey and the creativity. Some people could argue is that the downfall to Canadian whiskey, because you don't know when you're picking up a bottle, which is it? Is this going to be traditional light style Canadian whiskey, or is this going to be a heavier, bolder, 100% rye like a light Lot 40 or somewhere in between? So it's a little bit about getting that message out there for Canadian whiskey that, yeah, hey, we're very versatile. We're very diverse. We can do lots of things with it. And if you take the blending course, if I've actually deep dive, which I'm going to do with the A, B's, and C's of whiskeys with Gina and Dave next week, we also have the luxury of blending in 9.09% wine or 2-year-old other spirits. So it's 2-year-old spirit that's been aged in wood, which then can bring a whole nother level of complexity to Canadian whiskey. For example, we released a J.P. Wiser's Union 52. A number of years ago. I think you had an opportunity to try it when you were in Victoria, where we put in a 52-year-old single malt Scotch into Canadian whiskey. I didn't get complaints on that, and that's part of the 909 is my point. So people will criticize 909. It's cheating. There is a whole history to why that has evolved with Canadian whiskey. If you go back to the original formula and recipe books, I talk about it actually in my book here, if anybody's interested in reading a book that I've made. So there is a whole history why 909 exists, and they tend to be the more expensive ingredients we put in our whiskey, and it's a wonderful thing to play with, and maybe that's a partnership. Greg, I know you talked about French whiskey. It would be fun to blend in French whiskey into a Canadian whiskey to see how that would work out as well.
Let's talk about that book for a minute. Where is it available?
Okay, so I have. I'll go back a little bit. I have two books.
Yes,
2 books. Yeah, I have my camera here. I go opposite direction here. So COVID left me with an opportunity, Mark, to be at home. Thank you for. There you go. There's the 2 books there. One's called The Keeper of History. One is called Blending 101. Okay, and they can be purchased at jpwiserstour.ca, and they'll ship to anywhere around the world. So what I had done during the COVID, I was at home, not able to travel anywhere, Mark, and so I just started writing a book. So I do a lot of these seminars, and everything else, and everybody's always looking for slides. So I took the opportunity to sit down and write down all the things in quite detail, and I completely wrote it and sent it over to marketing and asked, what do you guys think of this? I said, do you think this would be something that we could do with around Canadian whiskey? And they just, oh yeah. And they started reading it, and they said, you actually got 2 books here. And I said, well, what do you mean? One really focuses on the history of Canadian whiskey and what you brought to the industry, Don. that should be book 1. And book 2 is more technical in terms of distilling and fermenting and aging, and more around the whiskey wheel that I have here. And I actually talk about old original recipes, the very first recipes in Canada. I actually write them in the book, Mark. And talk about the 909. I talk about chill filtration and caramel coloring and all those things. And so I split the 2 books apart, and they've now become available. And we didn't put it on Amazon or anything like that. We just selling it through our brand center. And we've actually went through the first edition already. We printed about 650 books of each, and then we ran out of them in a matter of 4 or 5 months, actually. So we're just about to print the second edition, and from what I can tell, yeah, thanks, Mark. And it's been going quite well with it, actually. I'm actually thinking about doing an electronic version of it if we can, looking into it, because that's one of the asks people have had. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool. And the reason on the titles of the books, Mark, The Keeper of History, I had my old boss, Jim Stansky, when he hired me, and actually 10 years ago, next week is my 10-year anniversary as the master blender as well. He always told me, Mark, that you are the keeper of history. And I said, well, what does that mean? I know I can memorize the history of Canadian whiskey. I can read Davin's book. He says, no, that's not what I mean by it. He says, you understand and why we do things today. Why did we do this? Why did we not do this? And you got to be able to tell your story as to why we do things and be able to pass it along to the next generation. And that's why that's where that title came from, as the keeper of history. So it's about my 25-year career and the things that I've brought to the industry and some of my thoughts as well. So it's the 2 interesting reads for sure, Mark. And thanks for promoting it.
It's glad to, because I need to get copies of those myself, and I'm going to hit the website as soon as we hit this. As soon as we finish this up, I know Greg said he was having some problems with it.
Yeah. Just email. There's an email. If those who are outside of Canada, there's an email address there. Just email them, and they'll email you back, and they can make sure you'll get a copy and everything as well. Okay, Greg. And same for Mark as well. Or you know my email address too, Mark. Yeah. We can make sure. We can make sure. Yeah.
Now, Tyrone has a question. He loved both of the books, and he wants to know if you meet many people who are interested in both the history and the science of whiskey, or do whiskey fans you meet tend to fall into one camp, either history or science?
Oh, I got to say both, Tyrone. And it's been funny. Group there. I actually had my brother, who's not even into whiskey at all. He read the science book, and he thought, wow, this is really how whiskey's made. And he says, I want more detail, was actually what he got from it. And he's not a scientist whatsoever. So it's written in a way, Tyrone, that yeah, it is sciencey, but it's written in a way, yes, I get it and I understand what you're trying to say. So it's not overwhelming in terms of that. The history, I think you got to understand where we come from as Canadian whiskey producers to appreciate why we do the things we do today. And I think Tyrone's had a chance to hear me speak in many classes before. And I think there's interest in both books. If you're just a casual, want it on the coffee table, the history book is the one I recommend. But I think you'd be surprised, even though you might be a casual whiskey, but it is an easy read too, that Blending 101.
And Joel Carlton just poured an 11 Souls, which is one of the Good and Warts special editions, right?
Yes.
I love the way you guys come up with unusual, the way you guys name some of these special editions to really tie in with the story behind the whiskey and why it was created and actually have some history to it. Give us the story behind 11 Souls.
So 11 Souls was the Gooderham and Warts, which the original distillery was in Toronto, Ontario. Gooderham, at one point in Canadian history, that was the largest distillery in Canada in the year 1900, making over 2 million gallons of whiskey a year. They were very prevalent in the Toronto community. When they came over into Toronto, it would have been called North York at that time, or sorry, York at that time. They sailed treacherously on ships, and many people perished along the way. And on that particular ship, that when Gooderham came over to start his milling business, there were 11 orphans. and he adopted them once he came to Canada, and hence the term 11 souls, and that's where it came from. The other thing is, I always like to match the marketing side of things when I'm making the whiskeys. That's probably the most complicated blend that we've made to date. Inside of it, there are certainly 11 different ingredients as well. I know when I handed off the recipe to our blenders, they were ready to strangle my neck, Mark. What do you mean? You're putting 11 different ingredients in? But if anyone's blenders on here, on an industrial scale, that can get quite complicated in a hurry. But certainly one of my favorite whiskeys that we've made along the way.
Given that some blended scotches are made with as many as 40 or 50 different whiskeys, I don't want to hear them complaining about 11.
I can't. Yeah, I can't even imagine putting 40 or 50. I've had thoughts of doing things like that. To be honest with you, is my 25-year anniversary was the company was last year, and I thought about doing a 25 blended whiskey, but it didn't get too far, Mark, shall we say? But I thought maybe someday we'll make an extreme blend somehow, some way here. But always the challenge is actually the challenge is excise when you're doing those things. Because when you're doing a larger blend for us in Canadian whiskey, they don't tend to be large volumes. So then you're dipping into barrels and you're taking out a quarter of a barrel or a third of a barrel. Usually excise deals with us in whole barrels. So that ends up in how you report that to them in terms of taxation is probably the larger challenge to a distillery, actually. Sorry, I'm going right into the weeds here as a Canadian whiskey producer, but that's usually is the issue.
No, that's one of the unusual things that really people don't even think about is what you do when you only need a quarter of a barrel.
Yeah, and that, do you chalk it up as it is an angel share loss? So we've been working with our excise officer and how to and we now got partial barrels out there, meaning our warehouse and the accounting ledgers for whiskey. So it's it's an unusual problem to have. It's something that we've never really faced, but it's something we got to address as whiskey producers, is that people want unique and rare, and how do you meet those challenges? And I'm sure you see it, Mark, all the time. Single cask releases, rare and hard to find stuff, and that becomes a challenge to larger producers such as ourselves.
Well, look at just what you're facing with this lot 40 18-year-old.
Yeah,
you've got what, 99 bottles of it?
That's it. Yeah. That was easier to deal with than 11 souls, actually. To be honest, because it was a whole barrel, so at least we could deal with a whole barrel on that. Now, for us to run it through a chiller, the challenge for us to do it on a small scale is
please tell me you didn't chill filter this one.
We did chill filter it. We did chill filter.
Done.
Oh, Mark, it doesn't make a difference.
But it's the principle of the thing.
I can show you some flock. I don't want to show a flock.
Oh, show us the flock. People don't see flock because it never gets to us. We never get to see flock because it never gets to us because of all the chill filtering that goes on.
I don't know if I have one in my cupboard here. I'd love to show one on camera. Sorry, I'm off camera, guys, but
it's okay.
You can still hear me.
And flock is the flocculation. It's the residual oils and things that are sort of stay solid in a whiskey that isn't. And I'm trying to explain for folks. It's the kind of stuff that makes a whiskey cloudy that marketing types hate.
Yes.
Because it makes the bottles look inconsistent on a shelf. But whiskey lovers love because it adds extra flavor, in theory.
In theory. I know I've run panels on it. I don't know if this one here or not.
And as Dave Kuhn says, make whiskey oily again.
Can you see it? Sorry.
You can see, you can see a little bit there. Just hold it steady and you can see it floating around.
Yeah.
It's the little spots that are floating around.
Yeah, and it's more of a hassle when consumers don't understand, right? You can see that. Sorry, I didn't even intend on getting onto this today. But people don't know. That's the challenge we have. Sorry, it's not the best of camera to show that, but
yeah, it's not the highest resolution, but whiskey if you shake it up a little bit, you can see it moving around in there. I can see see it on here. It's just the little dark spots that are moving against. If you look against the white wall in the background. Hold it up against the white wall in the background, and we'll see it a little easier. Yeah, you can see the little bits of crud floating around in there.
Yeah. That's an issue, especially when the new barrels like that one. Man, I didn't think I'd get into that, but it's tougher to explain that to an everyday consumer. I know your consumers get it, Mark, but our audience gets it, but for an everyday consumer, it's a tough explanation. Honestly, it is. Yeah, I know, and yes, it is. What I can tell, I think it's the oils. I think it is. It's a great question. I theorize it's the oils, in combination with wood extracts, I think.
Yeah.
I've tried to look at scientific papers out there. It's funny how whiskey producers will never put scientific papers out there on problems. But for what I
you could be the first.
Yeah, that's what I speculated is it's like you said, those fatty acid esters.
It's the stuff that doesn't dissolve into the solution.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And honestly, we've tested our panelists. I mean, I actually got sitting here beside me. Because people have asked me about this many times. Chill filtration, can you actually tell a difference? And I said, really, the only true way to do it is take the exact batch of whiskey before filtering, take it after filtering, put it in a colored blue glass, and do it that way. And we've done that with our panelists, and within a 95% confidence interval, they can't tell the difference in a triangle test. Yeah, does it take something out, chilling? Yes, it does, Mark. I can't say it doesn't take something out. It has to, right? Because it doesn't follow the solution. But from a sensory profile, we couldn't do it. So I got lot 40 sitting here. We just did it the other day. So I got a case of unfiltered, and maybe one of these master classes one day I'll put it out there and just see if people can tell a difference. I get asked about it, so I collected it here. So someday when I do a master class, maybe I'll challenge the audience.
I wonder if the difference might be in mouthfeel and texture instead of flavor.
I think so. I tried it on the one we have here. I think I could get it, but then I got just so exhausted. Not exhausted, but you know what I mean. Your tongue.
Your palate gets burned out. Yeah.
Yeah. That it's just, man, within the first couple of sips, and then after that, you just can't tell. So, yeah. I mean, I don't doubt it. I mean, all I can do is comment on my own whiskeys, Mark. Other people's whiskeys who distill differently, maybe it's more of an issue, but I can only comment on the ones we make.
So Whiskey Canuck wants to know about the impact that humidity control has on aging.
Yep. Yeah, great question. I answered that the other day in the ABCs of whiskey. In humid climates, the alcohol strength will go down during the aging process. In arid climates, like the southern Alberta, the strength will go up. So for Kentucky and here in southwestern Ontario, where we're located, the strength will go down over time. And I find over about a 10-year period, we'll lose about 4% alcohol. It's kind of sits where ours sits at. And our humidity level is, I think, around 50 to 70% humidity in our area. That's kind of about the average humidity level. So, yeah, good question.
It would be hard for you to do humidity control and temperature control in those warehouses, given the temperature extremes over the course of the year.
Yeah, you couldn't. When I was doing my PhD, though, I must I could put up some slides if you want. But when I was doing my PhD, I actually had it in a controlled room, the whiskey barrels that were aging, and it was in a room controlled and in warm, and the actual strength went up. And I figured the relative humidity was probably 30 to 50. So it was under 50, whereas in our aging warehouses are over 50. I don't know if 50% relative humidity is a sweet spot per se. I don't know. You'd have to have a really controlled room to start understanding where does it flip from reducing, and I don't know how you'd even begin. You'd have to have lots of money to test something like that, I think, and rooms with certain humidity levels.
And at some point, you get to overthinking it too much. And
yeah. Why would you want to do it? I guess. Yeah, but it'd be a fun experiment, I guess.
That's one of the things where you need a warehouse X like they have at Buffalo Trace, where you can do experiments like that.
Yeah, and if they can control relative humidity, yeah, that would be a fun experiment. And then how would it actually control it with temperature? I'm sure that has a factor in that as well. And then the entry strength, probably makes a difference too. I mean, there's lots of things that you can play with when you talk about barrel proof and relative humidity.
So what questions do we still not know about whiskey? What do we still not understand after all the research that's been done over the last 150, 200 years or more? What do we still not quite get?
I think one of the things that is the big challenge for us is the quality of incoming grain a little bit. I know I talk about our gatekeeper, and you've met Christy at our grain elevator, Mark, of smelling the incoming grain and looking for the off odors in it. I think that's a big challenge to whiskey producers, and in particular Josman, in terms of what will it eventually connect and look like after the distillation process. I don't know how you take a 40 metric ton truck and say, yes, this is a good quality. Or is there a rapid method to say, yes, this is going to cause us an issue, or is this not going to cause an issue? So I think that is one scientific thing that's a challenge for us. I think, I don't know if we'll ever solve it. The angel share is another one. I don't know how you solve that one. And I know we talk about it all the time, but think about the volatiles that come off all the whiskey barrels all around the world. I don't know how you solve that one. And I think many people have tried and almost gone bankrupt trying to solve that angel share loss. So that's a challenge for us if I was to look at it. I think malt is an interesting one. I know you're probably starting to see smaller whiskey producers start playing with different styles of malts. I think that's an interesting place to play. I think another interesting place to play is taking it from the rum world is sour mashing or dunder. A little bit. I think there's microorganisms out there that create very interesting esters, very interesting flavor compounds. When distilled, could give you some interesting flavors in your whiskey. So I think there's lots of places you can play and study. It's just a matter of hitting what consumers understand. So you got to connect the marketing side of it. Today, I would say consumers connect to barrels and understand a barrel and get a barrel and barrel finishing. My biggest challenge is I'm getting into the twilight of my career is I got to start setting up the next Master Blender for what are their challenges are they going to look at in the next 10 years.
I would suggest one of those challenges ought to be single malt. We've seen a bunch of good Canadian single malts coming out, but you guys haven't done one yet, right?
I've got one aging. It's just not ready yet. I've tested and learned it. Yeah. I've tested and learned a single rye malt and a barley malt. I think it's 5 or 6 years in. I can understand now why a lot of single malts in Scotland are 12 years. It's just not ready to even come out yet. So I've looked at it as a 6-year-old. Yeah, it's got a little bit to go yet. So I have made some rye malts and some barley malt, definitely. So I think that's grain. I think you've touched on a point there, though. I think grain is one that people get and understand. I think that is the next one, and obviously I've done some work on it, and hopefully setting up the next master blender to be able to release it.
Tell me about your process for identifying your successor. How do you go about deciding who's going to be the next master blender?
That's a loaded question. There are people here that could take over my role. I don't think I'd be responsible in doing my job if they weren't able to do it. So we do have a team of individuals here that can easily step into my role. So I'll start with that. In terms of who ultimately will succeed me, I think they'll look for a person that certainly has their philosophies on whiskey, certainly has experience with whiskey, certainly the keeper of history. Why did we do things so you don't do the mistakes that Don did or the mistakes the previous blender did, and why we put things away? So I think somebody's going to have to be in a role for a number of years training up to it. And that's probably not something that's unexpected for you. That's my look at it. So I've been 10 years in the role now. I'm 49. I hope to be around a little while longer yet, but it's thoughts that I've been thinking about, Mark, honestly, as how to hand it off with seamlessly to the next person.
Well, you have to keep that in mind, because it's part of the responsibility is to make sure that the next generation is ready in case you get hit by an errant hockey puck or something while reffing one night.
I lost 3 teeth doing that. Win the lottery is like with his, I got told that once. I said, you got to say win the lottery. If you win the lottery, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I gotta, that person's got to be around. Is why am I putting things away now? Why am I putting single malts away? What was my thought process of that? Um, the other one I'm thinking about is specific varieties of grain, and the other one I'm thinking about is yeast. You've heard me talk about that before as well, Mark. That I think yeast is an underplayed thing, and you're starting to see producers. I know Four Roses is probably the best at it, is when they're talking about yeast, but you're starting to see. I think other producers start talking about it. Is why is the unique yeast strains giving this property to your whiskey?
Well, with that, we have killed an hour of your time that you're never going to get back. And Don, as always, I appreciate the time. Thank you for joining us tonight. Dr. Don Livermore from the Hiram Walker Distillery in Windsor, Ontario. Show us the books again.
Yep.
So people can take a look at them, and jpwiserstour.ca.
Yep.
We'll put that address up again.
Yeah, and if you're having a problem, there's an email address on that site. Just email that email address, and they'll take care to make sure you get copies of the books.
All right. Thank you, Don. We appreciate the time as always. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next week on the Happy Hour Live webcast. Take care of yourselves. Have a great weekend. See you soon.